Next, we have Tara Miller, who will be giving a talk titled Mapping Environmental Health Hazards, Wildlife Lead Exposure in Urban and Rural Settings. Tara.
Hi, everyone. Next slide, please. So we know that lead is a major health hazard for both wildlife and people. One of the questions we need to answer in order to address this problem is where wildlife and people are getting exposed to lead. So to answer this question, I'm using records from wildlife rehabilitation centers, which take in sick and injured wildlife. So animals brought to these wildlife centers can be tested for lead, or they can be found with pieces of lead inside them. And then we can map the locations where these animals with lead were found. So I'm specifically seeking to answer whether we can detect geographical hotspots of these wildlife lead cases. And then we may be able to connect wildlife lead exposure to locations where people may be more at risk of lead exposure, using this idea of wildlife as sentinels, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. So we may be able to use wildlife lead cases to identify areas of greater health risk for people. Next slide, please. So here I've mapped the locations of animals found with lead in the light blue dots, and this is across the northeastern US. And you can see clusters in upstate New York, as well as a lot of dots down by kind of DC, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Delaware area there. The main spatial pattern that jumps out is that the wildlife lead cases cluster around the wildlife centers, which are in the red stars. And this makes sense since most animals will typically be picked up and brought to the nearest center. So most animals are found near a center. You get kind of a certain radius around a center that animals will be pulled in from. However, when we're zooming in around each individual center, we see that the locations where animals with lead were found are actually fairly spatially dispersed. So rather than being clustered into a small number of geographical hotspots where most animals were exposed to lead, animals with lead were found very spread out in the areas around wildlife centers. So to me, this indicates that wildlife may be getting lead exposure from many widespread disparate sources rather than a smaller number of major sources. And this highlights a concern for people as well, as it reinforces our knowledge that lead is very widespread and prevalent in the environment. And it illustrates that this problem is much harder to remediate than if we could pinpoint just a few major sources. Next slide, please. My next steps in this research will be to try to identify potential sources of the lead exposure using these spatial data. So particularly looking at if more animals may be exposed to lead from discrete sources, such as lead bullets or fishing gear, as compared with more environmentally widespread sources like lead in soil. And I'll also be comparing different groups of species to see if these comparisons can help pinpoint sources of lead. So species like eagles and hawks may be more likely to get lead exposure from lead bullets, whereas waterfowl may be more likely to get exposure from lead fishing gear. So this may be able to help us to get at these possible sources of lead exposure. Thank you. And major thanks to all of the collaborators as well as Urban for funding.